joined us today. Welcome to our Family Surf Sunday. You might notice some kids around greeting and doing some special things today. So we're going to be doing a song at the very end, and we'll let you know when that's coming. We'd love the kids to join us in as well up here. But yeah, we're just so glad you joined us. We're just going to continue worshiping the Lord.
For the love right, so our next song, I want to invite all of our kids to come up and join us. We're going to sing My Lighthouse, which we sang during our awesome kids club over the summer. So kids, come up and join us. We stay on the floor on this little stage down here. We have some fun motions, and I'm going to teach you some of them. So the song goes, my, you point to yourself. I want to see you doing it. Lighthouse, and then make a lighthouse on your head. And then we're going to sway it back and forth. And then we do it again. And then part of the song goes safe to shore. So you're going to go safe to, clap, shore. And then we're going to go this way towards the wiggle space. And then safe to shore towards the cafe. All right. You got it. Let's do it.
You are the peace. Awesome job, everyone. You guys can go ahead and take a seat. And I am going to invite Brooklyn and Grace up for our announcements.
Good morning and welcome to Pursue. I'm Brooklyn.
And I'm Grace.
We're so glad you're here.
At Pursuit, we value giving as a way of worship. You can give online at Pursuit Community Church/give. Text Give Pursuit to 94,000. Search Pursuit Community in the App Store or the P.O. Box at 1209 New Brooklyn, MN. Yeah. Close.
We have some
Oh, yeah. God likes a happy giver, but he'll take grumpy ones too.
we have some exciting events coming up. First, our Trunk or Treat event is on October 24th from 5:30 to 8:30 p.m. If you are interested, you can text Pursuit Trunk to 94,000 to sign up. And let me tell you, running out of candy at Trunk or Treat, that's scarier than any costume you see.
We also have Kids Ministry Volunteer Meeting coming up on October 6th at 11:45 a.m. here in the Worship Center. Lunch and child care will be provided. We still need more child care volunteers, so if you like kids and free food, this is the perfect opportunity. And let's be honest, who can say no to free food? But seriously, we can need the help.
If you're interested in being part of the prayer team, we're hosting a meeting on October 13th. It's an amazing way to get more involved and to help cover our church in prayer. Hey, Grace, why did the prayer team bring a ladder to church?
Why?
To take their prayers to a higher level.
Now let's transition to the question of the day. It's a fun way to get to know new people. What is something that you were nervous or scared to do but are glad you did it? Mine is when I took a test to get into advanced classes. I was freaking out. I thought, everybody there's going to be smarter. I got in.
Mine was when I was at camp with Grace, actually, and I was really scared to do the zip line, and Grace kind of said, like, you'll like it, just try it, and then I tried it, and then I did it like 3 more times. Now turn to someone near you and share. You have 4 minutes.
Hey, everybody. All right. Got me? Check. 1, 2. Check, check. Daniel? You can hear me? Okay. I can't hear myself yet, so. All right, everybody. Hope you made some friends. Afterwards, encourage you to finish your conversations with people. Welcome to Family Serve Sunday. It's kind of nice having extra kids. Are there any kids here? Anybody? Any kids? I guess not. Can I hear any of the kids here? Are there any kids here? Okay, you guys can make a little bit of noise right now. This is the time. Ready? Are there any kids in the room? All right. Okay. Sorry about that, adults. Fifth Sundays, we try to do a Family Serve Sunday, so this is really fun, getting our kids involved in everything we do. Kids, I'm going to try not to preach in a way that bores you. Well, we'll do my best. I cannot promise anything. I mean, the adults get bored, so, I will say, one of the things that we kind of mentioned here in the announcements, last year, when we did Trunk or Treat, we ran out of candy. Not only us, but the community center ran out of candy because it was so well attended. And this year, the way that it's already looking online, the amount of people interested in the event that's on Facebook for the community center is kind of nuts. And I'm assuming we're going to need way more candy than we needed last year. So if you don't plan on serving, you can just go buy lots and lots of candy, pounds. You can wheelbarrow in as much candy as you can, and we will definitely use it. And just a side note, if you if you have access to be able to get candy that's not Halloween themed, we can actually reuse that for Christmas when we do the bags that go along with the Christmas gift, the gift Operation Joy. We can reuse it and put it in the bags for that. So it's actually even better if you bring us candy that doesn't have a Halloween theme. I know that's really hard during this time of year, so it's fine if you just bring us the Halloween stuff. We'll use it. We'll get rid of it. Maybe we'll use it all. Maybe we won't. I do want to say, if you hear a little bit of chirping, that's okay, because we have our kids in with us today. We don't do this every single week, but again, on Fifth Sundays, we try to have a really good time. Our church is 1/3 children, and some mornings it's even like half children. So it's just, this is really fun. So we are in our Like a Good Neighbor series, and we've been kind of going through some of the elements of what it looks like to be good neighbors to people in our world. This is going to actually take us through the beginning of November, and so we'll be looking at different aspects of what it means to be a good neighbor each week. And today, we're talking about something that I think keeps a lot of us from actually ever going and sharing our faith or ever making connections with people. And that's just the idea that maybe sometimes we're afraid. We're afraid to connect with people, or we don't know what to do, or we feel like we're going to be in a weird situation, or we feel like it's not going to go the way we hope. And so sometimes we avoid doing it because we're afraid. And I know in the 90s there were a couple books. One was called Just Walk Across the Room. Pretty sure that's what it was called. And the idea was just garner up enough bravery to go across the room and tell somebody about Jesus. Another book that I remember reading at that time was called Contagious Christianity. And it was one of the things I remember pulling out of that book was just try to go to the same place and buy stuff in the same place and get to know the people in those places. And I practice what I like to call like consumer evangelism, out of that book. And I know this has been kind of there's been whole books written on this concept of what it takes to overcome your fears of what it might look like to connect with somebody that you don't know. And I want you to know that those fears everybody feels those fears. And that as believers, we have to find ways to overcome those fears in order to be the good neighbor that Christ has called us to be. And so sometimes it looks like you having to take a step and do something that makes you feel a little bit uncomfortable. We give you practice every week. Or we tell you to talk to a stranger during question of the day every single week. We kind of force you to do it for 4 minutes. Hopefully you're talking to somebody maybe that's new that you don't know. This is kind of a safe environment. But what does that look like to do that to non-believers? Because I think there are a lot of things that kind of get in our way when we're feeling that fear. There's things that we kind of have to overcome and things that we kind of need to fight through. And those fears are real. I mean, there's the fear of rejection, the fear of somebody asking you a question that you don't know the answer to, the fear of people who are different than you. There's a lot of differences in not only, race, ethnicity, age, gender. There's a lot of things that separate us and that we kind of feel a little bit of fear over. How is this person going to receive me? Are they going to reject me? Are they going to ask me a question I don't know the answer to? And I want to give you a picture today of what Paul did when he went into a completely foreign place and how he made connections with people to share the gospel. This is one of my absolute favorite passages of Paul. We actually dealt with this passage when we did our Acts series a year or two ago. That's going to be annoying. Okay. And it's one of my favorite passages on how Paul kind of overcomes what should be a situation where it would cause you some anxiety. He starts up a relationship with non-believers in the city of Athens, and he begins to share the gospel with people who are very far from God. And it's what we're called to do as good neighbors. So I'm going to jump right into the passage here. It's Acts chapter 17. And the first idea here in our notes is that overcoming fear starts with connecting with God's heart for people. If you're in the app, there's fill-ins there for you too. Might be good to be able to do that with your kid as well. And I'm going to read chapter 17, verses 16 through 18. So here we go. While Paul was waiting for them in Athens, so what's just happened before this, Paul was in the city of Berea, and his friends hung out and stayed there, and he went ahead of them to Athens. In fact, he kind of got run out of town. There were some people that were trying to start kind of some trouble, and they were looking for Paul. And so Paul kind of goes ahead and goes to Athens and leaves them. So he goes by himself to a new city full of all kinds of opportunities, but also it's kind of a tough place. The gospel has never been preached there. No one really knows anything about Jesus there. There's not there's not really anything for him to build on. There's not really a connection that he has with people. He kind of has to go in and start from scratch. And so he goes into Athens. And just to put in perspective, Athens is this incredible city, still a crown jewel in Rome's empire, still a place where, philosophy and all of these the culture kind of crosses in Athens, and a lot of the most new ideas or the most, all these different philosophies were kind of like coming into one place, and then they were kind of like affecting the whole of the empire of Rome. And so Paul goes ahead of them. So it says, while he was waiting for them in Athens, he's talking about Timothy and Barnabas, who are still left behind in the last city, he was greatly distressed to see that the city was full of idols. And so he reasoned in the synagogue with both Jews and God-fearing Greeks, as well as in the marketplace day by day with those who happened to be there. So he starts off with this idea that he's going to start in the synagogue and talk to religious people, Jews that he kind of knows and knows exactly how. We see him do the same pattern. He goes into a synagogue. He starts talking about God. These are people who know God, love God, right? And he's going in to share about Jesus with them. And it says, not only does he start there, but then he also goes into the marketplace. And the marketplace was kind of like the heart of the city. It's kind of this place where everything is going on. It's a place where the courts were. It's a place where commerce was happening. It's a place where they're freely kind of exchanging ideas. And he just kind of goes into this place and starts to share about Jesus. I don't know if you've ever been, on a mission trip, or you've maybe been part of a ministry where you started a ministry in a place where there was nothing there. I know one time when we were in Mexico, the missionaries were like, all right, let's go. We're going to go to this kind of market area. And we just went to this market area, and we just kind of created space, and we set up a sound system, and we started doing this skit live in front of all these people. And then one of the missionaries stood up and started to preach the gospel just live, open in a marketplace in Puebla, Mexico, in the center of Mexico. And I just thought, this is amazing. What would this look like if we tried to do this in Roseville or in New Brighton or in Mounds View? Where would we find enough people that we could kind of create some space and then just begin to preach the gospel? I think for us, sometimes we think about people who have a a speaker and stand on a street corner and then preach in a way that is kind of aggressive. That's kind of the people that do that here in the United States. If you're ever in New York City, you're kind of just walking around. It won't be long before you'll bump into a street preacher who's just kind of preaching the gospel. Hopefully they're doing it nicely and not creating all kinds of problems. But that's what Paul's doing. He just kind of goes into the marketplace and just sort of starts to communicate the gospel, which takes an unbelievable amount of bravery. He doesn't know how people are going to respond. He doesn't know if anyone's going to listen. He doesn't know if these ideas about Jesus are even going to hit or anyone's going to be paying attention. He doesn't have any idea how this is going to look. And I think for us, it's kind of hard, when we think about reaching out to new people that don't know anything about Jesus. And I feel like sometimes adults, this is harder for us than it is for kids, right? I think sometimes kids do this even better than we do. Like, I went to the dog park a couple weeks ago, and we're talking about all the dogs, and there's 4 or 5 different people just kind of hanging there, and their dogs are running around, and we're all talking about the names of the dogs. This one's name is this one's name is that. And somebody who's there goes, oh, I'm with Macy, and somebody who's there goes, oh, what's your name, little girl? And she's like, oh, I'm Macy. And this is my dad. This is Mark, and he's a pastor. And he loves Jesus. This is what she says to all these people who are standing there. And so here I am, didn't plan on having any deep theological conversations with anybody at the dog park. I was just there to run my dog so he doesn't tear up my house, right? And here's my daughter, who introduces me as a local pastor who would love to talk to you about Jesus. And all the adults who are standing there in that circle are all kind of like, right? But it's the boldness of a kid sometimes. That's just unbelievable. Kids, don't lose that, by the way. If you have a chance to talk about Jesus, go for it. Right? Us adults, sometimes we're afraid. Sometimes we fear what people are going to think about us or whether they're going to reject us. You know what? They're never going to reject you. You're cute. We don't have cute going for us, okay? And so Paul, he goes out into the marketplace and he just starts to preach. He just starts to go for it, right? I mean, you can imagine the marketplace, all this stuff coming together, all these vendors, all these people. This is kind of the center and the heartbeat of the city, and Paul knows that's the place where Jesus needs to be preached. He needs to be preached where people will hear the word, and he needs to be brave enough to go and start the conversation with people who don't necessarily know anything about Jesus, right? Just imagine this venue. There are courts that happen in this place. There are noodle vendors. Anybody? Following along? Kids? You might even see next to the noodle vendor someone selling chicken tenders. Bingo. And there's Paul bringing the gospel, and it says the thing that inspires him to do this, and it uses the phrase in our version today. Sorry, I'm looking for the word here. Can you go back to 16? Yep. He says, while Paul was waiting for them to notice, he was greatly distressed to see that the city was full of idols. What is Paul doing? He's checking out the culture of the city. And he is greatly distressed. And this word for greatly distressed, it kind of translates in a bunch of different ways, but pretty much what it means is irritated or provoked, or even anger can be translated to be angry. Like he walked around the city and he saw what was going on and he was overwhelmed and he was spurred on and he was irritated by what he saw and he was provoked by what he saw and he was frustrated by what he saw, and it created movement in his life. And I want to say too that we see this motivation come from his desire or his irritation with what he saw all over the city. All over the city were idols everywhere, were these statues. In fact, Athens was famous at that time for having thousands of statues all over the city to all kinds of different gods. It was like the most pluralistic it could possibly be. There were every single god represented in statues all over the city. And when Paul kind of got there and saw what was going on, he was just moved. He was moved to action. It was like a holy frustration that he had in that moment. It was an anger that kind of came up inside of him to think like, this city is like lost. They're worshiping everything. And when you're worshiping everything, you're really worshiping nothing, right? And so he was provoked to move. And I think we see this in Jesus' ministry as well, right? Jesus, it uses a different word for him. It says when he sees a crowd of people, he says he looks over the crowd of people and he said they're like sheep without a shepherd. And he was provoked. And the word it uses often for him was compassion, that he had compassion on the people. But he was emotionally motivated to care for and to seek out these people and to share the gospel with them. Paul was also emotionally motivated. And I think part of us taking the chance to go and talk to somebody about Jesus, going across the street when you're at your mailbox, or reaching out to that friend at work, or reaching out to that family member who has shut the door on the conversation, but you're going to bring it up again. Oftentimes, what we're actually missing is not that we're overcome with fear. It's just that we don't care. That if we're being honest with ourselves, we actually just don't care. Paul is provoked. He is distressed. He is motivated by what he sees around him, and he's going to take that motivation and go to a marketplace where people are just kind of like, you're crazy. What are you talking about? He's that crazy street preacher who's out there talking about Jesus because he can't not do it. Like, he's motivated by his emotion that he feels for the people of the city. And Jesus was the same way. He felt compassion on people. He was provoked. He had emotion for the people. And then he went out of his way to reach the people who weren't being reached in that city. And I think sometimes we have to actually step back and say, have I really connected with God's heart for people? Am I provoked enough to overcome the fear that I have about connecting with people? Am I provoked enough to actually take the risk of having the conversation with somebody about who Jesus is? Because that's where it starts for Paul. So he's greatly distressed. He reasoned in the synagogue with both the Jews and the God-fearing Greeks, as well as in the marketplace day by day, those who happen to be there. Verse 18. It says, a group of Epicurean and Stoic philosophers began to debate with him. Some of them asked, what is this babbler trying to say? And that word babbler is very interesting. It actually, it's sort of like, it's like somebody who picks. It actually connects with the idea of like a bird who kind of picks all the time. And almost like Paul is asking questions and saying things that just kind of irritate people, almost like having like a spur in your shoe or something. Like, it's just frustrating to the people that are there. Paul is just taking it right to them and continue to argue with them and continue to win the arguments with them, and they continue to be irritated with him. That's kind of the tack that he was taking with these philosophers. And these philosophers, there's not really that much to know about it. Epicurean philosophers were basically people who are like, eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we die. That was kind of their philosophy. Everything was material. So have as good of a time as you need to have right now, because this is all there is. That was the Epicurean philosophers. And Stoic philosophers, I mean, we all know what a Stoic philosopher is. I mean, you probably have a neighbor who's a Stoic philosopher. Minnesota's full of Stoic philosophers, right? People are just yep, sure. Chill, calm. You can't upset them. They will, be stoic no matter what you throw at them, right? And so we know these were the two people that were starting to debate with Paul, and they were probably debating with each other, and there was all this debate going on in this sort of like marketplace. Others remarked, he seems to be advocating for foreign gods. They didn't really even understand what he was saying. They said this because Paul was preaching the good news about Jesus and the resurrection, and oftentimes they looked at Jesus and the resurrection as two different people, and they were trying to figure out what Paul was actually talking about. But overcoming fear starts with connecting with God's heart for people. So it's like, okay, so if we can connect with the idea that God cares about people and wants us to connect with them and try to overcome that fear, that thing we're afraid of, then what does that actually look like? What kind of skills do we need to have? Well, Paul shows us what kind of skills we need to have to connect with lost people. The first one is simple curiosity. Simple curiosity. And this is verse 19. Then they took him and brought him to the meeting at the Areopagus. So they're now switching venues to a place where a lot of this philosophical stuff, in fact, if Paul were sharing in this setting, it wouldn't have been like a church service. They did not have a hymn and then Paul got up and then they did another hymn, when he was done. Like that wasn't how it went. It's think more like of a TED Talk. right? At the Areopagus, the people with the best ideas came and they shared their stuff. It was more like giving a lecture at a college, right? He's sharing the ideas that he has that are new to these people. Where they said to him, may we know what this new teaching is that you're presenting? So he went from the marketplace to more where the philosophers are. He took these ideas from kind of the heart of the city to sort of the educational heart of the city. And he said, you're bringing some strange ideas to our ears, and we would like to know what they mean. And he said, all the Athenians and the foreigners who lived there spent their time doing nothing but talking about and listening to the latest ideas. Paul then stood up in the meeting of the Areopagus and said, and so he begins to preach. I'm going to save this section for the next part here. But Paul was curious. And I want to say, oftentimes when we're trying to reach someone for Jesus, the problem that we have a lot of times is we have like a method that we use, and we try to apply that method to every single person, right? And I've shared this before, but like even to the point where I think there have been times where people, and well-meaning people, have created sort of like a process of sharing your faith, and they kind of give you handholds to go through, kind of make sure that you do it right. Ask a certain question, then respond with a certain idea, then get the person to agree with you here, then take them to the next place, and the next place, and the next place. And those are fine. If someone asks you to share the gospel, there is some really important stuff that you got to make sure that it's part of the presentation. I'm not hating on that. But being curious oftentimes will open the door to you being able to share the gospel clearly. And in fact, oftentimes it's not that you got a chance to share the gospel the first encounter that you had with somebody. It's actually that you asked them a question that just they couldn't resolve. Like if you can come up with ways to ask questions that people can't resolve, you then start to become that thing that they just can't let go of. And they come back and they ask you another question, and then you don't resolve it. You just ask them more questions. Curiosity is often the beginning of a relationship with somebody where you're going to be able to share the gospel, but you're working your way towards that, and you're sort of opening them up to the idea that, okay, now I'm a little closer, now I'm a little closer, now I'm a little closer. You don't have to be the Bible answer person in order to share your faith. In fact, all you have to do is ask great questions of people. I've shared before, but like one of my favorite questions to ask, especially new parents, when I get into conversations, have you guys decided what you're going to teach your kids about God? Because a lot of times, people who aren't believers have different ideas about what they should teach their kids about God. And oftentimes, they haven't had any conversations about what that even looks like. Right? You can ask, hey, a really easy entry question. One of the ones that we use kind of when we're doing our tent at the fair, and we're talking to people who don't really know anything about God and aren't part of a church. Hey, do you go to church anywhere? Like, sometimes just asking a simple question to somebody and being curious about their answer will take you down a path that you never would have went down or planned to go down or started to go down because you were just curious to get to know them, to understand who they are, what makes them tick, what's the thing that's going to be an opportunity for you to share with them. And I think people, when someone's genuinely curious about them, they don't mind talking too much about themselves. I said Macy blew up my spot at the dog park, and this lady talked to me about different types of churches for like a solid hour. She just kept telling me all the stuff that she thought about every single church that's out there. And I just listened and asked questions and listened more and asked questions and just listened more and asked questions. Until finally, when we got kind of close to the end of the conversation, she said, well, you're a pastor. Tell me about your church. I did not go into that conversation thinking I need to make sure she understands everything there is to know about Pursuit Community Church. I didn't go into that conversation thinking I'm going to explain the entire gospel to this person in this moment. I just listened to her talk about the things that irritated her about religion, and then got a chance to talk about how awesome you guys are. It was a pretty cool way of having that conversation. Just being curious. I think sometimes we don't really know where those questions will lead. We're worried about the questions we won't be able to answer. And really what we should be thinking is, how do I get to know this person and understand them? Figure out what makes them tick. Figure out how God is going to use this conversation to lead them closer to the gospel. And look, sometimes they ask you the question. Right? So tell me about Jesus. So tell me about your church. Right? That's where it goes after you've had a long conversation with somebody where they've shared and shared and shared and shared and shared and shared. This lady was just talking the whole time about herself. So they bring Paul to the Areopagus, which is this place where they're sharing all of these, different ideas. And I want to read you a couple quotes from The Art of Neighboring. The first is this: Fear. This is from chapter 4 of The Art of Neighboring, which I recommend reading, by the way. Fear is a primary reason that keeps us from connecting with our neighbors. Fear of rejection, fear of knowing what to say, fear of getting stuck in a conversation that we can't get out of, are just a few of the fears that can paralyze us. And then on curiosity, we need to move towards the initial fears and awkwardness and allow ourselves to get curious about those who live nearby. Curiosity is a powerful antidote to fear because it helps us to focus on the other person instead of our own insecurities. And so curiosity is the first one. Second one is the ability to build bridges. And so here's what Paul has to say in that section where he starts to preach. I'm going to go back. Can we go back to 22? David? I know it's going to be a pain in the butt. There you go. Paul stood in the meeting. People of Athens, I see that in every way you are very religious. For I walked around and I looked carefully at your objects of worship. I even found an altar with this inscription: to the unknown God. So you are ignorant of the very thing you worship, and this is what I am going to proclaim to you. And so Paul, in checking out their culture and understanding who they were and doing his background research on what these people were all about, he found an inscription to an unknown God. It's kind of a complicated story, and I'm not even sure how historically accurate or perfectly accurate it is, but one of the stories about this idea that I kind of came across was that at some point there was some sort of famine in Athens, and they decided that what they would do would be to, I know this sounds crazy, but this is really the story behind this, what they would do is release a bunch of sheep in the city, and that these sheep, whenever they went and sat down, wherever they went throughout the city and wherever they sat down, that the deity that was closest to these sheep would be the one that they would give sacrifice to. And so they went through this like cleansing ritual where they were trying to get the famine to end. And so they were going to kind of make sacrifice to certain gods where these sheep had sat down nearest to an idol. Just a crazy idea. But this is the superstition that the people had at that time. And what happened was some of these sheep, because if you just let sheep loose in a city and they just kind of go where they want, kind of went outside of the city and sat in places where they weren't close to any idols anywhere and kind of messed up their whole idea. And so one of the things that they did was they created an idol to an unknown God to make sacrifice for those sheep that sat next to no God. So there you go. That's the idea of where this actually came from. And I can't verify this or tell you how historically accurate it is, but it sounds crazy enough that these people who were, kind of just so worried about worshiping, every single God, thought maybe we missed one. And let's put up an inscription to an unknown God. And let's put that somewhere in the city too. Let's just make sure we cover our bases and we don't miss somebody. Because we could be going through this whole famine because we didn't make, sacrifice to this unknown God. We missed one and now we're in trouble, right? So this is kind of what happened. So as Paul's walking around and he was provoked by all these idols, he found this one that was made, it was to an unknown God. And he said, this is perfect. I'm going to use this. He began to sort of build a bridge to the people, kind of understanding their culture and understanding how to communicate the gospel. That is our second idea, that we have the ability, not just simple curiosity, but we have the ability to build bridges with people. Once we learn stuff about them, once we understand the culture around us. Now, I'm not telling you go home and watch 5 hours of Netflix tonight so that you can understand the culture better. But be aware of what the culture is, what people are bathing themselves in. Everyone in our culture, whether they know it or not, is being discipled by something. And so just be aware of what the idols are around you. Be aware of what people are kind of putting their identity into in the culture around us. So that's what Paul does. He builds a bridge to them. He says, okay, you guys are religious. I can see that. You're very worried about making sure that you don't miss a God. Let me tell you about a God you missed. Let me tell you about a God who's actually more important than all of these idols. I'm going to preach to you in a way that builds a bridge to something we have in common, and then communicates the gospel in an amazing way. This is what he says in verse 24. The God who made the world and everything in it is the Lord of heaven and earth and does not live in temples built by human hands. In fact, as he said this, okay, at the Areopagus, which was also called Mars Hill, which again was a deity that they worshipped, the god of war was Mars, stood right next to the temple of Athena, right, the patron deity of this city. And you can just imagine him pointing to the Parthenon that has a huge statue of Athena in it. And he says, the God who made the world and everything in it, who made the Lord of heaven and earth, does not live in temples built by human hands. Like it's not there, but I can see Paul pointing to the temple of Athena and going, this is not a thing. You guys are all worshiping a statue that a dude made. You probably knew him. Louis, who made that statue, right? Couple years back. We all knew that guy. Athena doesn't live there. Okay? This is a different kind of God. He's not, stuck in a temple somewhere in a city. He's the God that made all of this. He doesn't live in temples built by human hands. And he's not served by human hands as if he needed anything. Rather, he himself gives everyone life and breath and everything else. He says to them, your ability to sit here and argue philosophies comes from the idea that God created you, gave you a brain to be able to do this, lets you have breath, circulates blood through your body. Like there's 100 things that happen every single second of the day that you're not in control of that give you life. Where do you think that came from? It came from God who's not trapped in a temple, who wasn't made by human hands. And he doesn't need anything from us. In fact, we're the ones that need him. Okay? So he kind of flips the whole idea on their hand, or on its head. He says, from one man he made all nations, that they should inhabit the whole earth, and he marked out their appointed times in history and the boundaries of their land. He's like, there's a plan throughout all of history. There's a reason I'm here today even speaking this message to you. He said God did this so that they would seek him and perhaps reach out for him and find him, though he is not far from any one of us. And then here he is building bridges again and making cultural references. He says, for in him we live and move and have our being. Am I the only person that knows the song? In him we live and move and have our being. I know you know it because I was in your church when I sang it. Nobody else knows this? I love this idea that there was a worship song. You know it. You're with me. Thank you. I love this idea that there was a worship song that we would sing commonly that was actually taken from a quote that Paul quoted somebody in the culture. He quoted one of their prophets, one of their poets. It became part of Scripture, and then we sang it as a worship song. Like, just let that blow your mind for a second. Like a philosopher from first century Greece wrote those words. And then thousands of years later, we were singing them as a worship song. Because Paul's making the connection from their culture to Jesus, and it becomes worship for those of us who worship Jesus. He says, for in him we live and move and have our being. As some of your own poets have said, we are his offspring. He quotes two of the poets in their culture. And again, he's aware of what the heartbeat of the city is, and he's aware that all of these people would know the poets and the prophets. Okay, this would be like us quoting, I don't know, who's like a famous, be like Kendrick Lamar, right? Like some people in the church would be upset if we were quoting some sort of like rapper or something, but that would be the connection that Paul's making. He's like, your poets, your prophets, they said in him we live and move and have our being. I agree with that. That's God. We're talking about God, the maker of the entire world. He said, you guys agree that we are his offspring. We're sons and daughters of this God. And he makes the connection for them. I think as we share our faith, we need to understand that building bridges to people, connecting sometimes to the things that they're most connected to, or the thing that their identity is in, oftentimes will open doors for us to be able to have conversations about God. Now, again, it doesn't mean that we're out there consuming a bunch of trash in, trash out. Okay, it's not a great idea for us to be bathing ourselves in the worst parts of culture. But if we don't know what's connecting people or what's their identity is wrapped up in, how can we have a conversation with them that helps them connect with God. So he says, as some of your own poets have said, and he quotes, he says, therefore, since we are God's offspring, we should not think that the divine being is like gold or silver or stone, an image made by human design or skill. In the past, God overlooked such ignorance, but now he commands all people everywhere to repent. And at some point, the conversation has to go to the idea of a personal challenge. Maybe not the first time, maybe not the 10th time, but at some point, the conversation of sharing the gospel over whatever this relationship looks like with someone, and over sharing over time, has to get to a point where there's a personal challenge to receive Jesus. Paul always ends with the gospel with a personal challenge, with repentance, with the idea that Jesus has called them to do something. He could start anywhere. He could start from anywhere, but it always ends in the same place. And that's what it looks like for us to share the gospel. It looks like that we understand it and that we can challenge people. He says, for he has set a day when he will judge the world with justice by the man he has appointed. He has given proof of this to everyone by raising him from the dead. And so Paul has clearly communicated the gospel to a place where it hasn't been communicated at all. He's done it in the temple, in the marketplace, and now in this sort of philosopher's playground where he's able now to communicate some new ideas to these people and make connections. But he's done it in such a way that he's been curious about the culture around him, that he's built bridges, and then that he's been bold enough to challenge them to know Jesus. You know, and I think sometimes our boldness can be too soon, too aggressive. We know in Scripture there are all kinds of people that had this sort of personality. We see Peter slicing off the soldier's ear. He's too aggressive in that moment. He's ready to just kind of pull his sword and swipe it off. James and John, okay, they were the sons of Zebedee, right? Sons of thunder. You know, these guys were always creating problems and getting into fights and starting up, you know, all this stuff. Like these guys maybe sometimes had too much boldness. You have to judge where you're at. I know on the East Coast, you could be a little bit more forward and a little bit more bold, and here it maybe takes a softer approach to kind of have a conversation with somebody about Jesus. But it's the same thing. It takes boldness, whether that boldness is soft or whether it is strong. Okay? So it takes boldness. And then look kind of how it closes this section. It says, when they heard about the resurrection of the dead, some of them sneered. Others said, we want to hear you again on this subject. And at that, Paul left the council. Some of the people became followers of Paul and believed. Among them was Dionysius, a member of the Areopagus, also a woman named Damaris, and a number of others. I still got 2 left. I got to figure out how to get these in there. It's clear that Paul goes into this place, he reads the room, he understands the culture, he communicates in a way that people are ready to hear, and he does it with boldness. And he's not afraid. Even at the end of this, as people are responding to him, some just reject the idea outright. Others, hey, let me hear more about that. And others who are ready to listen and respond to what Paul's challenge was, right? You have 3 different types of responses to the gospel being preached. And I want you to know that as you start to think through what it looks like to be a good neighbor and to share your, the gospel with people, to overcome the fears that you might have, the things that separate you from other people, it doesn't mean that every single person that you share the gospel with is going to accept Jesus the moment that you share the gospel. Okay? This is just a general concept. Like, even if you were to just understand marketing in general, oftentimes they'll tell you when you do marketing that it takes 7 contacts with people before they're willing to respond to the marketing that you're sending them. So if you're sending them a postcard in the mail, there's a contact. If someone tells them about the thing that you're trying to, there's a contact. It takes 7 times somebody sharing, about a business or whatever. I think the gospel maybe is even harder than that. This is something we're talking about. People have their entire identity wrapped up into something, right? They've grown up a certain way. They have a way they live their life. They have some sort of philosophy that they're living their life from. And you're asking them to take all of those things, all of that philosophy, all of that identity, and to place it onto Jesus. Like it could mean that you connect with somebody and you share the gospel with them again and again and again and again. And you're going to have different responses. Some people will sneer. Right? In 2024, oftentimes you're going to get people who will sneer at the idea of the gospel. It just will happen. You'll bring up the Bible, you'll talk about Jesus, they'll be like, whatever. And they'll sneer. Some people, they're not ready to make any decisions, but they're just interested in listening. And they'll say, let's talk more about that sometime, to which you then can continue the conversation another time. Some people may respond to Jesus in that moment. Oftentimes when someone does respond to Jesus, you aren't the first one to share the gospel with them. Like it's often the entire kingdom of believers who's sharing the gospel with people, and those connections are being made because God is the one drawing those people into relationship, and you are one more person who's allowing the Holy Spirit to use you to draw that person closer to God. And man, it's awesome when you get to be the one that actually reaps, who helps that person find Jesus and find faith. That you actually get to help them step over the line of faith. But oftentimes, you just continue to share and continue to share and continue to share and continue to share. I had a conversation one time with a missionary in Japan, and they said to me that their entire ministry, they had been there like 10 years, and they'd shared the gospel like 1,000,000 times. Like it felt like they were sharing the gospel almost every day. They said the way the culture was in Japan, people would invite you into their home and they would let you share the entire gospel with them, and you could literally have a great conversation with somebody, laying out the finer points of Christianity with them, and they would listen, and they would be connected to what you were saying to them, and they would kind of like be tracking along and following and just very polite, having this polite conversation about who Jesus is. But he said in that culture, that in his entire 10 years of ministry in that place in Japan, he'd seen only one person actually convert to following Christ. That like they were willing to listen and kind of open to the idea and ready for you to share the gospel with them, but never did they actually see people come to know Jesus. Let's people were coming from all over the place. So all these Christians were like serving and trying to share Jesus as they served and as they loved people. And again, the amount of converts to Christianity is like exceedingly low. It doesn't mean that someone's going to respond to and say yes. But you are kind of chipping away at whatever that looks like, and sometimes there's a huge wall up that needs to be worked on for years and years and years by hundreds of people. And there are other times when you invite your neighbor, hey, you want to go to church with us? And before you know it, they've found Jesus, and it was like the easiest thing in the world. But we're called in all those situations to share the love of Jesus. I think Paul here goes into what is an incredibly difficult place to share the gospel. And I think some people might even say that he was like not very successful in Athens. And yet we see that there are some people who accept Jesus and follow. And this is the beginning of a ministry that happens in Athens that, we don't know the end of. We don't know how many people responded. We don't know what it looked like, but we know Paul began the process. And I think for us, overcoming that fear means taking the pressure off of understanding it's up to us to save people. It's not up to us to save people. God is the one that is drawing them into a relationship. But we are one piece, one little connection, one touch point for somebody who doesn't know Jesus to kind of pull them a little closer and a little closer and a little closer. I'm really supposed to say Phantom Tax and Demure before I end, so there you go. So, let me pray for us. Jesus, as we think about the fears that we have in sharing the gospel, would you give us boldness? Would you give us boldness, the ability to connect and build bridges to people, the compassion to be motivated, to be working on this, God, the ability to be curious and ask questions? And would you use us as one more link in a chain that draws people into relationship with you, God? That even as we do this as individuals, as we do this as a church, God, even as our culture around us begins to change, God, would you be the one who draws them into relationship, and would you use us as we are obedient and bold? And God, would you grow your kingdom and draw people into relationship with you through us. In Jesus' name, amen. Amen, kids, you were amazing. Let's give a round of applause for the kids. All right. I just want to say one more thing. In the lobby, there is a table. That table has on it some t-shirts and some bags that are left over from the fair. You can take whatever you want. Knock yourself. Oh, and there's clips too, apparently. Yeah, power clips, not chip clips, power clips. So go and get a free gift on the way out. We'll see you guys next week. We love you. I said